Well, hello, Bravites, and welcome to another edition of Movie Reviews with yours truly, Toya. And today we're not so much reviewing a movie as a stand-up special by the Dave Chappelle called The Closer. The Closer was first marketed last week, actually. That's the first time I saw it, saying that Dave was about to release a new stand-up special. And on Monday, October 5th, 2021, he did just that. Netflix released the special, and as soon as it was out and people knew about it, they flocked to it, did not delay, but immediately ran to watch this special. And that is because over the last few years, every year and a half or so, Dave has released a comedy special. And Netflix has aired, I think, all of them, if I'm not mistaken. And his last one was Sticks and Stones, which came out in 2019. And it was one of the more risque routines that he's ever done. He's usually very funny, always very funny, actually. But this one was laced with some issues of the day, some political ideals, and things that, kind of ruffle feathers, if you will, for people. And so when this one came out, The Closer, people kind of ran to watch it, pretty much knowing what to expect, but not to what degree to expect. And so over the years, we've watched Dave Chappelle kind of mature, if you will. His previous stand-ups, when he was a little bit younger, were more silly. He would make very funny voices, do imitations, talk about his teachers, grades in school, getting high with his friends, breaking into homes, those kinds of things. But over the years, he has begun to feel what life really is for a Black man from his perspective, and things kind of changed with his comedy stylings. So if you notice, the Chappelle Show was satirical, it was very funny, but it only lasted about 2 seasons. The third season came out, and it was really just the raw and uncut tape that was on the floor, and they wanted to make good of it. So they kind of tried to piece something together, but Dave was not in the third season at all. He had no dealings with the show. He walked away just as he was gaining a considerable amount of notoriety, and just when things were starting to pick up for him, the momentum was getting a little stronger. People everywhere knew him. They knew his jokes. They still quote them to this day. And so we question why Dave would walk away at such a time. But if you look at things, Dave came back out on the scene years later and talked about why he left so much money, 50 or 60 million, I believe, on the table and stopped doing the Chappelle Show. And one of the reasons that he cited was because there were things that he was told he could and could not say in comedy. And he could not say some things because they were not offensive and not were especially true to the groups that he was passing judgment upon, or using foul language, or, signifying upon. And to him, he said that he made plenty of jokes about Black people and called them names and things like that, and was never called on it. And so he started to take issue with the way the direction of the show was going, because there were just things that were okay for him to say about Black people, but not other disenfranchised groups. And I believe this is what initially fueled the fire under Dave, that changed his comedy stylings from being more silly and joking around to addressing issues of the day, taking a political stance, if you will. Liking Dave Chappelle these days is almost like telling people who you voted for. It's become so politicized because he expresses strong viewpoints that people may not agree with, but some people still think are very funny and very hilarious. And so if you're supporting Dave, if you're pubbing his work, it's almost like you have to defend why you're doing so. And a lot of comedians these days feel as though the recent movements, the Me Too movements and the cancel culture have really put a muzzle on how far they can go, right? Comedians are used to towing the line, pushing the envelope. Back in the day, jokes were knock-knock jokes. They were a little more clean. But then you had those red light comedians, right, that your parents would listen to on records after dark when the kids were in the bed. You had people like Red Fox, who told the dirtiest of jokes, some that it's still hard to listen to today. But that was the way the culture of comedy started to change. It became less about entertaining the masses and more about expressing yourself in your own unique, pure way. And so I believe that's what Dave is doing now. Other comedians, like I mentioned, Jim Jeffries, he's an Australian comedian, and he talked about how he watched Sticks and Stones and he thought it was genius and hilarious. And the things that he didn't agree with, he just moved on. But he feels like the freedom for comedians to express themselves in that way is kind of being stripped, because people will go back years later and look at something that was okay before and say, I'm upset about what you said, and make an issue about it. And things that were okayed by lawyers and by Netflix or whomever are now being called into question, which is making it harder for them to do their jobs. Of course, some might say, well, if your job entails you making hate speech or spreading lies or poking fun at disenfranchised groups, then yeah, you should be called out for it. But we want to ask the question, is comedy a place where we want to start with that? Do we want to target the comedians that are expressing themselves for laughs? And it can get dangerous, right? Because we look at it and we say Dave is homophobic and he's transphobic. And we don't say this. He's a self-proclaimed transphobic and homophobic comedian, right? But at the same time, it's like, is this where we start the fight? Is this what harm is going to come out of it? But if you give him a pass with these kinds of things, then what happens when people start to attack racially? When they start to make jokes that are frowned upon by law, what do we do then? So it's a very weird place to be. But in this special, it seems like Dave tried to ruffle all of the feathers he possibly could. He talked about racism. He talked about women's rights. He talked about transgendered homosexuals. He talked about everyone, and not necessarily in a good way, right? But he ended it with trying to understand where we all are and how we can all get an understanding of why we are where we are without taking each other's rights away, if you will. And he expressed to the audience, I don't really have a problem with the transgender community. I don't have a problem with the homosexual community, but I do have a problem with white people. And like I said, this goes back to, dealing with those who were in the room when he had to walk away from his show, when he had to walk away from tens of millions of dollars, when he had to be called to the carpet on things that he said about Black people and gay people, but not so much in trouble for Black people, the statements he made against Black people, but there was so much impunity. So much going behind him talking about gay people. He said he could say things with impunity towards Black people, but not gay people. And he made that expression again in this special. He kind of reiterated a few points that he made in other specials in this one to kind of drive the point home and kind of put the nail in the coffin as far as what he's trying to say when he expresses himself. And this was very interesting, the way that he put it. It's like he was not afraid to say exactly what was on his mind. He even brought up DaBaby and the situation with him at the Rolling Loud concert, and he juxtaposed that against his self-defense murder in Walmart, and people got all riled up about that. Why would you bring that up? Why would you give them this ammunition? But this is something that's been well known by many DaBaby fans. He's been exonerated. So the issue is not that Dave was trying to get DaBaby in trouble. He was trying to make the point of why is there so much trouble on DaBaby when he talked about the gay community. He did say really mean and nasty things though. But not so much when he literally kills a Black person. And so it's almost like a Black Lives Matter issue at this point. Dave never said that. He never mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement. But it's kind of the point that he was trying to drive home with. He also mentioned a few things about how with women's rights, he feels like he's a feminist, but the feminist movement doesn't necessarily embrace Black women. So where's the place for a Black woman in the feminist movement? or a black person, period. He gave the literal Webster's definition of a feminist, and it's a human, not male, not female, but somebody who believes fully in women's rights, equality. And he says that's where he is, and so that's why he pushes back on the transgender community somewhat. So he tried to use this as a dissertation, if you will, to kind of defend why he feels the way that he feels. And he talked a lot about how black people feel every day. The things that we all talk about at home, but don't necessarily get to say to a mass audience, right? And so a lot of black people were at home watching this and cheering and screaming and laughing at the television. Some were not. I'm not sure about others. White people are probably thinking it's hilarious as well. But if you looked in the audience, there were a few people that were not moved by the jokes that he made, especially a joke about space Jews, which was a whole thing that he kind of made up. That joke did not go over well in the special. He said it a couple times and it just kind of did not pass the bar. So we're looking at Dave expressing himself in a way that we've never really, well, we've seen it before, but this one was a little bit more real. Here we're looking at Dave in a way that we have not looked at him in a long time. Of course, before he's made jokes that were pushing the envelope, that told the line. I haven't really spoiled anything for you, so please feel free. If you have not watched the special yet, you can still watch it and take a lot from it that I have not even addressed. But I will say this, that this is one of the more sobering specials that we've ever seen Dave do. It was almost like a documentary, if you ask me. He was likened to a motivational speaker, right? Like he made a political speech. Like he has a perspective that we've heard, we've felt, but we have not really addressed before. It was almost emotional. Some people did actually cry watching it. It was something that triggered so many different emotions, some that you were surprised that you even had. But it was something that I feel like we needed, right? So in this one, we see Dave very sober. I'm not just saying not sober at mind, not just sober in his thoughts, but did not have a drink on stage with him at all. Did not smoke a cigarette at all. And we know Dave is a huge smoker, almost a chain smoker. Even when he went on SNL, there was a cigarette in his hand. He pays the fines, whatever, to be able to do that. But this time he did not do that. And that said something to me. And so I'm interested to know what you guys' thoughts are on that. There were so many things in this new special that were hilarious and that were offensive and that moved you to think in a different way about everything that you think about or everything that we know in this climate, in this day and time. So I'm interested to know your perspective on Dave's latest stand-up. He's, like I said, he's going to walk away for a while. He's not doing any more stand-ups for an indefinite amount of time. That's why this one was called The Closer. And he said that he's not going to address the lesbian, gay, the LGBTQ community anymore until he understands where we all are in this conversation. Are we laughing with each other? Are we laughing at you? Are we understanding each other well enough? Where are we in this discussion? Because I don't want to be seen as somebody who's just picking on your community. I want to be seen as somebody who's making notes about where my people, Black people, my community stands in this whole discussion, because everyone else seems to be making strides and progress and, you know, being protected relentlessly where Black people are not. And I think that was the crux of the conversation that he wanted to have with the audience. The conversation was not so much verbal, but it was in the responses. It was in, can you laugh at this? If not, why? Questioning where someone who's gay stands in the racial debate, in the racial fight. So there were so many things that we could take away from this and have a further discussion. It's not so much to be angry and throw rocks at Dave as it is to take from what he said and dissect it and understand a little bit more where we are in this world and some of the more pertinent fights that are happening and that need to still happen. So that's my take on the Dave Chappelle stand-up. For me, 5 spotlights. I thought it was genius. I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was upsetting. I thought it was provoking. I thought it was so many different things. But you can share your thoughts with me on what you thought about it, and we can talk more about it in the comment section. Please make sure you like, share, subscribe.